The wedding dress hung like a ghost in the corner of the room, mocking everything Boone Carter thought he knew about his future. 22 years old, and his life was already being sold to pay his father's debts. But this wasn't just any arrangement. Sterling Rhodes had made it clear. Marry the widow Cora Maddox, 30 years his senior, or lose the ranch that had been in his family for 3 generations. Boone stood at the window of the small church, watching dust devils dance across the barren landscape. His hands trembled as he adjusted the collar of his only good shirt. The other men in town whispered behind his back, calling him everything from desperate to pathetic. Some even laughed, saying he'd gotten himself a mother instead of a wife, but none of them understood the weight crushing his chest. His father had gambled away everything on a failed cattle drive, leaving debts that would take decades to repay. Sterling Rhodes owned half the territory now, and he collected on every debt with ruthless precision. When he'd proposed this solution, Boone had wanted to punch him in the face. Instead, he'd stood there like a coward and nodded. The church door creaked open behind him. Boone turned, expecting to see the preacher, or maybe one of the few guests brave enough to witness this spectacle. Instead, he saw her. Cora Maddox walked down the aisle with a dignity that made his throat tighten. She wasn't the frail old woman he'd imagined. Her graying hair was pulled back severely, but her green eyes held a fire that made him take a step backward. Her black dress was simple but well made, and she carried herself like someone who had faced worse things than a forced marriage. She stopped 3 feet away from him and studied his face with an intensity that made him want to hide. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else in the world." Boone swallowed hard. "Wouldn't you?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I've learned that what we want and what we need are often 2 different things." She moved closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I know what people are saying about us. I know what you're thinking, but you don't know anything about me. Boy, and I suspect there's more to you than meets the eye." The preacher cleared his throat from the altar, his Bible open and ready. Sterling Rhodes sat in the front pew, watching them with the satisfaction of a man who always got what he wanted. Boone felt trapped between his past and an uncertain future, with this strange woman as his only ally or greatest enemy. But as Cora took his arm and led him toward the altar, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Her hands were shaking just as much as his. The ceremony lasted exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes to bind 2 strangers together in an arrangement that satisfied everyone, except the bride and groom. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Boone felt like he was drowning in shallow water. Cora's lips barely touched his cheek during their awkward kiss, but he caught the scent of lavender soap and something else, something that reminded him of his mother's garden before the drought killed everything. Sterling Rhodes approached them immediately after, his smile as cold as January wind. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter. I trust you'll find married life agreeable." He turned to Boone with barely concealed contempt. "The deed transfer will be completed tomorrow morning. Your debt is settled, but remember our agreement. Any failure to honor this marriage, and I'll call in every other loan your family owes." Boone's jaw clenched. "I gave you my word. Words are cheap, boy. Actions prove character." Sterling tipped his hat to Cora. "Ma'am, I believe your husband has some learning to do about responsibility." After Sterling left with his satisfied smirk, Boone and Cora stood alone in the empty church. The silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and dust filtered through the cracks in the walls. "Your place or mine?" Cora asked, and for a moment, Boone thought she was making a joke, but her expression remained serious. "I don't have a place anymore," he admitted. "Lost it 3 months ago. Been sleeping in the barn at Miller's Ranch, doing odd jobs for food." Cora nodded as if this wasn't surprising news. "Then you'll come to my house. It's not much, but it's ours now, I suppose." She paused at the door. "There are rules, though. Things you need to understand before we take another step." Boone followed her outside to where a sturdy wagon waited. As she climbed up to the driver's seat with practiced ease, he noticed the rifle secured beneath the bench. Her movements were confident, like someone accustomed to depending on herself. "What kind of rule?" he asked, settling beside her. Ka snapped the reins and the horses started forward. "First rule, don't expect me to cook, clean, or tend to you like some hired help. I'm not your mother or your servant. Second rule, my bedroom door stays locked. We may be married on paper, but that's where it ends until I decide otherwise. The wagon creaked along the rutted road toward the edge of town. Boone watched her profile, trying to understand this woman who had just become his wife. What's the third rule? Ka was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Don't ask about my first husband. Some stories are better left buried. But as they approached a small house surrounded by a surprisingly well-maintained fence, Boone noticed something that made him wonder just how many secrets his new wife was hiding. The house was a revelation. From the outside, it looked like every other settler's cabin, weathered wood and a tin roof that had seen better years. But inside, Boone discovered a world that challenged everything he thought he knew about frontier living. Books lined shelves built into every available wall. Real books, leather-bound and well-carrared for, not the cheap paper novels most folks treasured. A piano sat in the corner, its surface polished to a shine that reflected the oil lamps. Cora noticed his stare. Surprised? I just didn't expect. He trailed off, unsure how to finish without sounding insulting. You didn't expect a woman my age living alone to have nice things? There was an edge to her voice that made him choose his next words carefully. I didn't expect anyone out here to have a piano. Cora set her hat on a hook by the door and smoothed her hair. My first husband believed education was the only wealth that couldn't be stolen. She moved through the room with familiar grace, lighting lamps and adjusting curtains. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. There's a washstand and clean linens. Boone climbed the narrow stairs, his boots echoing in the silence. The room she'd given him was sparse but clean, a bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the back of the property. He sat heavily on the mattress and put his head in his hands. This morning, he'd been a free man. Tonight, he was married to a stranger who owned more books than he'd ever seen and played piano like some kind of lady from back east. The sound of music drifted up from below. Cora was playing something slow and melancholy, her fingers moving across the keys with the confidence of years of practice. Boone found himself drawn to the top of the stairs, listening to the haunting melody that seemed to fill every corner of the house. The music stopped abruptly. Are you planning to stand there all evening, or are you going to come down and eat? Embarrassed at being caught, Boone descended the stairs. Ka had set out cold beef, bread and preserves on the kitchen table. She poured coffee from a pot that smelled better than anything he'd tasted in months. You play beautifully, he said, settling across from her. I had a good teacher. Her tone suggested the conversation was closed, but Boone pressed forward anyway. Who taught you? Cora's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Someone who's been dead for 5 years. She resumed eating with deliberate focus, but Boone caught something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Fear. Before he could ask another question, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Cora moved to the window and peered through the curtains, her body tensing like a cat preparing to bolt. Get upstairs, she whispered urgently. Now. But it was too late. Heavy boots stomped across the porch, and someone pounded on the door with enough force to rattle the frame. Cora Maddox, we know you're in there. The voice was rough, demanding with an accent that sounded like it came from somewhere back east. Open this door before we break it down. Cora's face had gone pale, but her movements were swift and precise. She grabbed the rifle from beneath the kitchen counter and checked the chambers with practiced efficiency. There's a back door through the pantry, she whispered to Boone. Take the path behind the chicken coop. It leads to Miller's place. I'm not leaving you alone with whoever that is. You don't understand. These men, they're not here for you. They're here because of something that happened a long time ago. Something that has nothing to do with our arrangement. Another thunderous knock shook the house. Please, Boone, just go. But something in her eyes, the way her hands trembled despite her steady voice, made him shake his head. We're married now, remember. For better or worse, according to that preacher. He moved to stand beside her. What do they want? Before Cora could answer, the door exploded inward. 3 men pushed through the splintered frame, their clothes dusty from hard travel. The leader was tall and lean with cold eyes that immediately found Cora across the room. His smile was the kind that promised pain. There she is, Mrs. Thomas Maddox. Or should I say, Mrs. Catherine Walsh. Boone felt Cora stiffen beside him. Catherine Walsh. That wasn't the name on their marriage certificate. I don't know what you're talking about, Cora said, but her voice lacked conviction. The man laughed. 5 years we've been tracking you, Catherine. 5 years since you disappeared with something that didn't belong to you. He noticed Boone for the first time. And who's this? Your new protector. I'm her husband, Boone said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Husband? The man's eyebrows rose. How touching. Did you tell him about Philadelphia, Catherine? Did you tell him about the bank? About what you took when you ran? Cora raised the rifle, her aim steady despite everything. Get out of my house. Our employer wants his property back. The money you stole, the documents you copied, we know you have them hidden somewhere. The man took a step forward. Make this easy on yourself and on your new husband. Boone's mind raced. Stolen money, documents. Who was the woman he'd married just hours ago? The leader's hand moved toward his gun. You've got 10 seconds to decide, Catherine. The easy way or the way that leaves your young husband widowed on his wedding night. That's when Cora did something that changed everything Boone thought he knew about courage. Cora fired a warning shot into the ceiling, sending splinters of wood raining down on everyone in the room. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and all three men instinctively ducked. But instead of threatening them further, she did something completely unexpected. She lowered the rifle and smiled. You want to know about Philadelphia, gentlemen? About what I supposedly stole? Her voice was steady now, almost conversational. Then let's talk about it properly, like civilized people. The leader straightened slowly, his hand still hovering near his weapon. What game are you playing, Catherine? No game, just the truth. Cora moved to the kitchen table and sat down, placing the rifle within easy reach. Boone, pour these men some coffee. They've traveled a long way. Boone stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Coffee? Trust me, she said quietly, and something in her tone made him obey. As Boone poured 3 cups with shaking hands, Cora looked directly at the leader. Your employer is Marcus Brennan, isn't he? Still angry about losing his bank? The man's eyes narrowed. Mr. Brennan wants his money back, all $50,000. 50,000? Cora laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Is that what he told you I took? How interesting. She sipped her coffee calmly while the 3 men remained standing, unsure how to handle this unexpected turn. Tell me, did Marcus mention that the money belonged to the Dakota Territory Land Office? Money he was laundering through his bank to steal homestead claims. Boone nearly dropped the coffee pot. $50,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. You're lying, the leader said, but doubt crept into his voice. Am I? Did he tell you why I worked at his bank? Why a woman with my education would take a clerk's position in Philadelphia? Cora's green eyes blazed. Because my husband, the real Thomas Maddox, died investigating Marcus Brennan's illegal land schemes. Died mysteriously. After asking too many questions about missing federal money, the leader's 2 companions exchanged glances. This wasn't the story they'd been told. I didn't steal anything, Cora continued. I retrieved evidence of federal crimes, evidence that's been sitting in a safety deposit box in Denver for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to surface. You're bluffing, the leader said, but his conviction was wavering. Cora stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the darkening sky. Maybe I am. Or maybe Marcus Brennan sent you out here to kill the one person who can prove he's been stealing from the United States government. She turned back to face them. The question is, gentlemen, are you prepared to hang for murder when this all comes to light? That's when Boone realized his wife wasn't just protecting stolen money. She was protecting evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful men in the territory. The leader's face darkened as Cora's words sank in. You expect us to believe Marcus Brennan is some kind of criminal mastermind? He's one of the most respected businessmen in Philadelphia. Respected men have committed the worst crimes in history, Cora replied, especially when they think they're untouchable. She moved closer to the 3 men, her fear seemingly replaced by something harder. Tell me, how much is he paying you for this job? A few hundred? 1,000? That's none of your business. The leader snapped. It is when you're risking your necks for pennies while he's stolen enough to buy a small city. Cora's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Do you really think Marcus plans to let you live after you retrieve his evidence? You've seen his face. You know his business. Dead men don't collect payment or tell stories. Boone watched the exchange with growing amazement. This woman he'd married was dismantling these dangerous men with nothing but words and logic. The two companions were shifting nervously, clearly reconsidering their situation. She's lying, boys, the leader said, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Don't let her get in your heads. Am I? Cora walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a leather journal. This belonged to my husband. Every detail of Brennan's operation is documented here. Names, dates, amounts stolen from federal land purchases, even the names of territorial officials taking bribes. She opened the journal and read, June 15th, 1869. Brennan deposited $12,000 in territorial funds into his personal account. Payment recorded as consulting fees for land evaluation services never performed. One of the companions stepped forward. Let me see that. Jake, don't, the leader warned, but Jake was already reading over Cora's shoulder. His face went white. Boss, this has Governor Hartley's signature and Judge Morrison's. If this is real, it's real, Cora said quietly, and there are 40 more entries just like it. Marcus Brennan has been systematically stealing federal money intended to help settlers claim their land. Money that was supposed to build schools, dig wells, establish law enforcement in new territories. Boone felt sick. He'd thought his family's financial troubles were the worst thing that could happen. But this was bigger than lost ranches or forced marriages. This was corruption that affected thousands of innocent families. The leader drew his gun. Enough. Journal or no journal. We have our orders. Hand over everything you took from Philadelphia, or we start shooting. But before anyone could react, the sound of multiple horses thundering toward the house made everyone freeze. Through the window, Boone could see torches moving through the darkness. Expecting more company? The leader asked coldly. Cora's face had gone ashen. Those aren't friends, she whispered. That's Marcus Brennan himself. The sound of boots on the porch was different this time. Heavier, more deliberate. Marcus Brennan didn't knock. He simply pushed through the already broken door like he owned the place, which, given his wealth and influence, he probably thought he did. Boone had expected a monster. But the man who entered was disappointingly ordinary. Average height, graying hair, expensive clothes that marked him as someone who'd never missed a meal or slept on hard ground. Only his eyes betrayed the ruthlessness that had built his empire on stolen money and ruined lives. Catherine, Brennan said, removing his hat with mock politeness, you look well. Rural life agrees with you. The three hired men suddenly looked nervous, realizing they were no longer the most dangerous people in the room. Their leader stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, we were just negotiating the return of your property. Were you? Brennan's voice was silk over steel. And how did that go? She claims the money was federal funds. Says she has evidence of your business dealings. Brennan's laugh was genuinely amused. Evidence? My dear Catherine? Surely you realize that evidence only matters if someone with authority is willing to act on it, and I've been very careful to ensure that won't happen. Cora clutched the journal tighter. Judge Morrison might disagree. So might Governor Hartley when they realize their signatures are on documents proving their corruption. Morrison died last month. Heart attack, very sudden. Brennan's smile was cold. And Governor Hartley, well, let's just say he's become much more reasonable about overlooking certain irregularities in territorial finances. Boone felt the room shift. The hired men were backing toward the door, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. Even they had limits. You killed Morrison? Cora whispered. I killed no one. But men in stressful positions sometimes suffer from poor health. Brennan moved closer, his presence filling the small kitchen. Now about that evidence and the $50,000 you took from my personal safe. It wasn't your money to begin with. Possession is 9/10 of the law, my dear, and I possess the law in 3 territories. Brennan nodded toward his men. Search the house. Tear it apart if necessary. But as the men moved to obey, Ka did something that stopped them cold. She struck a match and held it inches from the leather journal. One more step and 5 years of evidence goes up in smoke. Brennan's composure cracked for the first time. You wouldn't dare. That journal is your only protection. Is it? Cora's eyes blazed with determination. Or is it the one thing keeping you from killing us all right now? The match burned closer to her fingers, and Boone realized his wife was prepared to destroy everything rather than let Marcus Brennan win. The match burned down to Cora's fingertips, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled at Marcus Brennan with the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. Did I mention that this isn't the only copy? Brennan's face went white. What? My husband was thorough. He made 3 copies of everything before he died. One is in that safety deposit box in Denver. Another was mailed to a federal investigator in Washington 6 months ago. She let the match burn out and dropped it to the floor. This journal, it's just my personal reminder of what you took from me. Boone watched in amazement as Brennan's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The hired men were already edging toward the door, realizing they'd been lied to and used. You're bluffing, Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Cora walked to the kitchen window and pointed outside. See those riders approaching? That's Federal Marshal Tom Bradley and his deputies. I sent word to Denver yesterday about our wedding. Told them if anything happened to me or my new husband, they should investigate Marcus Brennan immediately. Through the window, Boone could see torches moving steadily toward the house. 6 riders moving with the purposeful formation of law enforcement. Brennan spun toward his hired men. Kill them both now. But the 3 men were already backing away. We didn't sign up for murdering federal witnesses, the leader said. Find yourself some other fools. They disappeared into the night, leaving Brennan alone with his rage and desperation. He drew his own gun, but his hands were shaking with fury. If I'm going down, you're coming with me, Catherine. Boone moved without thinking, throwing himself between Brennan and Kai just as the gun fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, but he stayed on his feet. Ka caught him as he stumbled, her strong arm steadying him. Marshal Bradley burst through the door with his deputies, weapons drawn. Drop the gun, Brennan. Brennan looked around the room, seeing his empire dissolving before his eyes. For a moment, Boone thought he might surrender. Instead, he raised the gun toward his own head. Marcus Brennan. You're under arrest for theft of federal funds and conspiracy to defraud the United States government, Bradley announced as he kicked the fallen weapon away. 3 months later, Boone stood in the same kitchen, his arm finally healed from the bullet wound. The house felt different now, filled with laughter instead of secrets. Cora was at the piano playing something joyful while sunlight streamed through clean windows. Any regrets? She asked, looking up from the keys. Boone thought about everything that had happened. Marcus Brennan was serving 20 years in federal prison. The $50,000 had been returned to the territorial government and used to establish schools in 3 counties, and Sterling Rhodes had mysteriously decided to forgive all of Boone's family debts after federal investigators began examining his business practices. Just one, Boone said, moving to stand beside his wife. What's that? I wish I'd known sooner what an extraordinary woman I was marrying. He touched her face gently. Catherine Walsh was brave, but Cora Carter is remarkable. She leaned into his touch. Some stories have better endings than beginnings. Outside their window, the land stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities neither of them had dared imagine on their wedding day. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where courage and justice meet in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.